Beneath the gentle gray skies of late autumn, nestled between golden fields and mist-kissed hedgerows, there sat a sleepy little village known only to those who wandered far enough to forget where they came from. Windmere was not marked boldly on maps, nor was it whispered about in tourist trails. It was a place you simply stumbled upon, as if led there by the soft tug of forgotten dreams or the distant hum of some old melody in the wind. Ivy clung to every old stone wall, and wooden fences leaned with age, guarding the quiet secrets of time itself. The air smelled of peat smoke and earth, with a hint of lavender drifting from unseen gardens. Somewhere, a brook gurgled over pebbles beneath the arched stone bridge that led to the heart of the village. A single, cobbled lane wound through Windmere, and at the end of it stood a thatched-roof cottage with blue shutters and a mailbox that read, E. Alden. Inside the cottage, the scent of chamomile and beeswax candles clung to the air like a memory. The hearth was warm, though the fire had long died out. Emma Alden had returned, quietly, after nearly 12 years away. Her boots left soft marks on the dew-damp ground as she stepped out of the small taxi that had dropped her near the post office. Windmere hadn't changed much, not the trees that leaned slightly with the wind's pull, nor the sleepy chatter of crows in the distance. It was just as she remembered, peaceful, a little strange, and completely silent, except for the occasional sigh of the willow tree that waited for her at the edge of town. That tree had been there for generations, older than any written record, its thick roots tangled with the soil like veins of memory, and its long green tendrils swaying as if whispering stories to anyone who dared to listen closely. The cottage had stood empty for years, yet nothing inside had grown dusty. The books remained where they were, shelves brimming with yellowed pages and notes tucked between covers. The old clock on the mantel still ticked, though it hadn't been wound in ages. Emma walked slowly from room to room, her fingertips brushing the wood of the banister, trailing over the fabric of the drapes, her eyes tracing the edges of photographs that hung slightly askew on the hallway wall. Everything smelled faintly of lemon and thyme, a scent that only old English homes seemed to carry. She remembered her grandmother's hands, always warm, always busy, kneading dough, clipping herbs, writing letters with a fountain pen that never ran dry. There had been stories, too, of the willow tree, of course, of how it could remember things, how, if you sat under it long enough in silence, it might hum to you in dreams. Emma never believed it then, but the older she grew, the more her heart leaned toward what couldn't be seen. The village, they said, had a spirit, not a ghost, not quite, but something that lived in the stillness, something that knew who belonged and who didn't. She poured herself a cup of tea, the kettle humming like a memory, and took it to the window that looked out toward the hill. The willow tree's long, sweeping arms swayed gently even though there was no wind. It had been 12 years since she'd last touched that tree's bark, and somehow it looked as if it had been waiting, still, patient, remembering her more than she remembered herself. It was just after dusk when Emma finally stepped outside again, the fading sunlight casting a honey-gold hue over the village rooftops and the fields beyond. The path that led to the willow tree had grown narrower than she remembered, overgrown with soft moss and tiny forget-me-nots that blinked up at her like blue eyes in the grass. Her boots crunched gently over the earth, though every step felt quieter than the last, as if the ground itself had been taught to hush in reverence for something sacred ahead. The air had cooled, and the scent of drying leaves mingled with that of chimney smoke rising in lazy spirals from distant rooftops. As she reached the base of the hill, her eyes lifted slowly to the familiar silhouette ahead. The willow tree stood tall and solemn, its trunk gnarled and wide like the torso of an ancient giant, its branches flowing downward in green ribbons that nearly touched the ground. The space beneath it had always felt like a separate world, a secret room open to the sky, where light passed through leaves like melted glass. She pushed gently past the trailing limbs and stepped inside. The moment she did, the air changed. It was cooler here, but not in a way that bit. It was the kind of cool that wrapped around you gently, like slipping into water just the right temperature. A hush fell over her thoughts. It wasn't silence exactly, but rather the presence of something that held the noise back. She knelt on the soft grass and placed a palm against the trunk. The bark felt dry and old, yet alive, vibrating faintly beneath her skin, as though the tree's heartbeat ran slower than time itself. She closed her eyes. She hadn't expected anything to happen. Not really. But as the evening deepened, and the wind failed to move a single leaf above her, a single sound stirred in her mind. Not in her ears, but somewhere deeper, like a voice whispering from behind a dream. It was neither male nor female, not words exactly. Just presence. A pulse. A knowing. As darkness spread across the fields like ink spilled on parchment, Emma sat with her back against the trunk, her head resting just below the crook of one of its great arms. The stars began to appear, one by one, as if pricked gently into the sky by invisible fingers. Somewhere in the village, a dog barked once and then fell silent. From beneath the sheltering arms of the willow, everything felt more distant, like the world had taken a step back to allow something older to come forward. Her breathing slowed, not from tiredness, but from something deeper, a sensation of being seen and safe. She didn't remember falling asleep. Not really, only that her thoughts began to drift like leaves on a current. Images rose and fell in her mind. Her grandmother's voice, soft as wool, telling her bedtime stories in that same lilting tone. The sound of her childhood laughter echoing in the garden when summer stretched endlessly ahead. The feel of cool sheets on warm skin as the night slipped past the open window. Then the dreams came, but they didn't feel like dreams. They felt like memories that hadn't happened yet. A field filled with white moths swirling in slow spirals. A small key buried under a stone shaped like a heart. A voice whispering a name she had not heard before but somehow knew belonged to her. The deeper she drifted, the more the tree seemed to hold her. Not just in body, but in essence. As if it had opened a door beneath the roots and invited her in, not to escape, but to remember. And through it all, the hum remained, steady, low, ancient, like the heartbeat of the land itself. When Emma finally stirred again, the moon was high, casting soft silver through the leaves. She didn't feel groggy or startled. She felt home, not in the sense of location, but in the sense of belonging, of being remembered by something she hadn't even realized she'd forgotten. By the time Emma returned to the cottage, dawn had only just begun to stretch its pale arms across the countryside. The fields lay bathed in soft lavender light, the horizon tinged with the quiet promise of another day. Birds had not yet broken into song, and the world felt suspended in that precious stillness that comes before morning truly awakens. Her boots were damp with dew, and her fingers held the faint scent of bark and leaf. She moved like someone coming back from a long voyage, not hurried, not lost, but changed in some quiet, invisible way. In the mirror above the hearth, her reflection looked the same. Same soft brown eyes, same dark hair pulled loose from the night wind. But her gaze had deepened, as if the shadows behind her pupils had grown richer with stories no one else had heard. She lit the fire and brewed a fresh pot of tea, though she barely touched it. The tree's presence lingered inside her, not as a memory, but as something alive. The hum, the dream, the whispered name. It was all still with her, flowing gently beneath her thoughts like a second heartbeat. She opened a drawer and pulled out one of her grandmother's old journals. The cover was cracked with age, the spine soft from years of handling. Inside, pages bloomed with elegant handwriting, careful loops and lines that danced across the parchment like wind through tall grass. Emma turned page after page until she found it. A drawing of the willow tree, inked by hand, and beneath it, a single line of text. It remembers what we forget, keeps what we lose. Her breath caught slightly in her throat. The words weren't just poetic, they were true, and in that moment, a thought unfurled inside her. Maybe the tree didn't just hold memories, but offered them back when the time was right. Maybe this was why she had returned. Not for closure, not for nostalgia, but because something in her needed to remember who she had been and what had been quietly waiting for her all along. As the sun finally rose, casting gold across the garden and spilling warmth through the kitchen window, Emma stepped outside once more. The village was waking slowly. A curtain was drawn across the street. A kettle whistled faintly in a neighboring house. The air was crisp but kind, and every breath she took felt cleaner, more full. She wandered to the edge of the garden where the old stone path curved toward the hill again, and she stood there for a long time, not moving, just watching the way the light caught the distant sway of the willow's branches. She didn't need to go back right away. The tree had already given her what she didn't know she was looking for, but she would return again, perhaps tonight, perhaps another day, and each time she would sit a little longer, listen a little deeper. The world had always spoken to those who were quiet enough to hear it. Some listened to stars, others to the sea. For Emma, it was the willow tree, and the way it carried the forgotten whispers of a life not lost, but gently waiting to be found. As she turned back toward the house, she realized something simple and clear. Peace wasn't something you stumbled into. It was something that waited in the places you belonged to, in the earth, in the breath of trees, in the hush between dreams. And sometimes all it took to find it was to sit still long enough beneath the right tree. The wind carried a soft murmur through the grass behind her, like a goodbye, or perhaps a promise. And though she would never be able to say for certain what the tree had said, she would always feel its message nestled somewhere within her. You were never forgotten. You just needed to remember